Now we're going to bring up Assured Partners has been in the back of the room. Many of you have been talking to, and we're going to give them an opportunity to come up here on stage and speak. And so we'll turn it over without further ado.
Afternoon, everybody. I know this is the presentation everybody's been waiting for, insurance, right? I'm Tim Hutter, Senior Vice President with Assured Partners Aerospace. Get the clicker. Just was going to take a short presentation. I was going to just cover some timely topics with regard to flight school insurance. Just wait. If I can get the button work up. There we go. Getting used to the clicker. Just as a little background, Assured Partners Aerospace is an aggregation of a number of legacy insurance brokers over the years. We have 13 offices now, coast to coast. Over 135 employees. Most of those employees are employed in a service role, and they make up licensed FAA pilots, mechanics, former military pilots. We've got quite a group of experienced aviators in our midst. Here's a map that just kind of covers where our offices are. You may not be familiar with the name Assured Partners, but maybe you're familiar with the legacy agencies that make up our firm. Everything from AirSure Insurance, which was based in Denver and Dallas, the Hope Insurance in South Carolina, Hardy Insurance out of Wichita, Regal Aviation out of Oregon, Pacific Coast Aviation Insurance out of California, and Air Power out of Phoenix. So that's just a number of the agencies that now make up Assured Partners Aerospace. As in many businesses, ours is a relationship-based business, and we do business with all of the aviation insurance companies throughout the United States, and we leverage those relationships with the insurance companies to the benefit of our clients, and it really brings value not only from a cost standpoint, but also in provisions and in the policies. Speaking of insurance companies, there's a number of new insurance companies that have come online this year, including Eiger Insurance. Beacon came online last year, and another one called Mach 3. So we have even more insurance companies to work with, and for you, the consumer, that's a really big benefit because it's helping bring down costs, as a lot of these new insurance companies are kind of scrambling for market share, and to compete with the established insurance companies, they need to be competitive and as far as insurance provisions, be as accommodating as possible. So that's a really good trend for the aviation insurance industry, seeing these additional insurance companies come online. So here's some of the topics I was going to touch on. Avoid these flight school insurance gotchas. So one of the first topics, which is very timely right now, is the issue of independent contractors, and in your case, CFI independent contractors. Are you treating your CFIs as W-2 employees? Are they 1099 independent contractors? Or is it a mix of both? The issue with independent contractor CFIs affects not only workers' comp issues, but also your aircraft liability issues. Starting with the aircraft liability issues, most base policies exclude independent contractors as insureds under the policy. So if there was an accident involving an independent CFI and that CFI was sued, they would typically not have any insurance protection. If you get sued, you would have coverage. Some insurance companies provide an endorsement to the policy that extends your liability coverage to the independent CFI. That, depending on your circumstance, that could be good or bad. The downside to that is if you have independent CFIs insured under your policy, that's going to dilute your limits of liability, because anything the insurance company pays out for the negligence of that independent CFI is going to come out of your liability limits. So there's a little dilution there. Our opinion, the best option is for you to require those independent CFIs to carry their own liability insurance, which is readily available and fairly cost effective. With respects to the workers' comp side, a lot of states are following in California's footsteps. Recently, California made some changes to their workers' compensation laws. It started a couple years ago with something called AB5 that stipulated that employers are responsible for providing workers' compensation insurance to independent contractors. And that's been even broadened a bit here in California. So even if those independent contractors that you're paying 1099 or LLCs or S Corps, for example, you're still responsible for reporting what you pay them and providing work comp unless they provide you and you have on file evidence that they have their own workers' compensation insurance. And auditors, workers' compensation auditors in California in particular, are really on top of that now. They're asking for all your 1099 records, and anybody that you've paid out on a 1099, they want to see evidence of that workers' comp for that independent contractor. And if you don't have it, the auditor is required, at least in California, to factor that money that you paid the independent contractors into your audit. So I know there's a few other states, Idaho and a few others, are kind of following along kind of the footsteps of California in that area. So that's that's something you want to pay attention to and make sure you're in compliance with your state's work comp laws with respects to those independent contractors. Negligent instruction coverage, does your policy include it? Most base policies are not going to include this endorsement. What it is professional liability insurance for you. So say you've provided somebody their initial training or their instrument rating or something, and later on, months or a year down the road, they have an accident, kill themselves, kill others, and somebody comes back and sues you and says, your training was deficient in some fashion, negligent or deficient, and you get sued. That would be excluded under your basic aircraft hull liability policy. So you want to make sure that you have added that negligent instruction coverage by endorsement to your aircraft liability policy. As a caveat, not all insurance companies will offer that, but the larger insurance companies, ones that are actively engaged in flight instruction, do offer that negligent instruction endorsement. Non-owned coverage, most all of your policies, your aircraft liability policies, are going to include non-owned liability to cover your liabilities arising out of aircraft that you don't own or lease. Most of the limitations on that non-owned, as far as the size of the aircraft and the value of the aircraft, is tied to the aircraft that you're actually insuring. So for example, if you're just operating fixed-wing aircraft and the maximum seating on the aircraft that you have on the policy is 4, your non-owned liability limitations will only cover aircraft up to that same size and type. So if you're providing instruction in the customer's aircraft, say they've got a 6-place aircraft and not a 4-place aircraft, your non-owned liability is not going to respond in the event of a loss. So you want to look at those provisions in your non-owned liability and make sure that the size of the aircraft and with respects to non-owned hull coverage, the value of the aircraft is enough to cover any aircraft that you're potentially flying as far for instruction or maintenance purposes, or you're positioning or ferrying a customer's aircraft. Make sure those non-owned parameters meet all those non-owned aircraft that you're potentially going to be using. Renter student liability endorsement. Does your policy include it? You can request this endorsement for little or no additional premium. So again, going back to that base policy, the students and renter pilots are not covered under your basic policy. So there's two ways to address that issue. One is request the student renter liability endorsement added to your policy, or B, require all your student and renter pilots to have their own student renter pilot, which is pretty common these days. The one downfall on the renter student liability endorsement being added to your policy is similar to the independent contractor endorsement I mentioned earlier, because if a student renter pilot is sued individually, they're covered under your policy. That in effect is going to reduce your available limits, and again, your dilutional limits. So our opinion, the best way to address student renter and their potential liabilities is to require them to buy their own policy. Contracts. Most of you maybe notice either on your general liability policy or aircraft policy that you've got contractual liability, and you may not be sure exactly what that is, but what contractual liability is to cover you for any liability that you assume from others under a contract. But it's not, those contracts aren't automatically insured unless you submit that contract within 30 days to your insurance company. They'll read through, and if they approve it, they'll endorse it to the policy, and you'll have coverage for any liability that you assume under a contract. So if you have contracts other than leases, airport leases for hangars, tie down buildings, those are automatically covered, but any contracts with any other third parties outside those lease or rental agreements for airport properties are not automatically covered. So that's probably something else you might want to review with your insurance broker. Is I've got a management agreement on an aircraft or what have you, and we're kind of assuming some liability from the owner of the aircraft, but if it's not submitted to the insurance company and specifically approved by the insurance company, that contractual liability is not going to kick in and protect you. Flipping over to that non-owned coverage for renters, as I mentioned, we recommend you go that route rather than providing the renter pilot's coverage under your policy through that student renter liability endorsement. And also, a lot of the underwriters are asking us these days is, when they're looking at your operation and underwriting, they're asking, are they requiring all their student and renter pilots to have their own coverage? And if we're able to tell them yes, that obviously kind of lessens the exposure to the insurance company, and they factor that in when they're rating your premiums. So that's one plus there. It gives you a lot of flexibility in the way that you're designing your agreements with your renter pilots and student pilots, because at that point you can stipulate, hey, we're going to make you responsible for our hull deductible, and you spell that under your rental agreement, your student pilot agreement. We're also going to make you responsible for any loss of use of the airplane. You ding up the airplane, okay, your renter pilot, you're going to cover the damage to the aircraft, but we're also losing revenue while it's down being repaired. So a lot of the better student renter policies, not only will they cover damage to the aircraft itself, but they'll also cover the flight school's loss of revenue while the aircraft's down for repairs. So that's another plus of requiring your student renter pilots to have that coverage, is it'll pick up some losses to you other than just damage to your aircraft. And speaking of those agreements that you have with your student pilots and your renter pilots, those are also really good agreements and contracts to submit to your underwriters for review. I know a lot of you probably are already doing that, but sometimes the insurance and indemnity provisions in those are good to have a second set of eyes put on, your broker and your insurance company. So we always recommend submitting those agreements and contracts for review as well. We have a proprietary student renter program. It's underwritten by AIG. And it's probably the broadest product in the market. As I said, one of the big things it does, it extends coverage to loss of use, and which is a benefit for the flight schools having your renter and student pilots with a very broad policy. And speaking of that, we've got some additional literature back here on the student renter pilots, a really nice brochure that really talks about the ins and outs of that renter insurance, and also some pamphlets that actually have pricing in it. They can also be purchased online, instantaneous coverage. Yeah, that is about it. Like I said, it was going to be kind of brief, but I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that anybody has. If none, I mean, feel free to stop back in the back and chat with us if you have any questions or anything comes up later. If you want to grab any of these brochures, we also have a very broad insurance programs for CFIs. So if you've got your independent CFIs, we've got a really nice insurance program for CFIs, and that policy not only covers liability and hull to non-owned aircraft that they're operating, but it also has a professional liability component. So if the CFI gets sued down the road a year or two later for what somebody claims was negligent instruction, our policy provides professional liability for the CFI as well, which is a really nice benefit. That said, any questions?
Any insurance-related questions for Assured Partners? Happy to field those now.
Okay, see none. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.